Okay, good morning, good day, and good evening to our weekly webinar series. So this week on a Monday, not on a Tuesday, but at the same time. Today, we're going to talk about achieving clean core, tooling, guardrails, and remediation playbooks. As usual, please put your questions in the Q&A box. And with that, I would hand it over to Lukas, who will be our host on this Monday.
Perfect. Thank you, Karina. Thank you for having me again. Why do I say again? You see it here in the overview. This is the second part of a two-part series on extensibility. So we have the whole October and lots of November that are in focus of clean core, as you see here. But and let me take the virtual laser pointer that you can see it, on October 14th, so quite some weeks back, we had a first session. I will now dive into the second part where we dive a bit deeper into how to measure clean core and especially for extensibility. As mentioned before, there are some more sessions upcoming, so we'll have a second part by Michael on the processes. We will have an overview of what is clean core with data, and then we will also in the next year have some more sessions on this. So yeah, I want to keep you in the loop there. There are some more things in here, but now let's dive in because I always tend to talk quite a lot and I want to make the best out of this hour that I have with you today. So let me dive in. That we today dive a bit deeper into the topic of clean core. And this was the last time's agenda. And today we want to focus on, we want to build up on this. Last time we talked about what is clean core and extensibility. Why do we have this kind of specialty with, we talked about ABAP cloud in there. It's a crucial part of our extensibility model, the cleanest options that we have on stack. That's why we dived a bit into this, how to do that, how to change the language version. And we dived then a bit into the clean core level concept to understand, okay, what is level A, B, C, D? Why did we do this? Why did we move from the three-tier extensibility model into the now level concept? We want to gain more insights. And today, for the get clean and stay clean, I want to dive a bit deeper. How do we get there? How do we measure and improve on clean core? And I think it's always like if we can measure something, it's important. So we will have again a special deep dive, this time on ABAP Test Cockpit and how to measure clean core or how it supports you measuring clean core. But I want to keep it equally weighted, that we talk a bit about KPIs in the system, the numbers themselves. What can you measure? What is making sense? What is already there? And therefore, it's good that we have the second session exactly now, because in the meantime, we had some great news and updates in our RISE dashboard. I want to share this with you, and I want to show this to you also. How does it, pardon, how does it look like? And at the same time, the second part that we keep, strike the right balance is governance maturity, because it's nice to measure something, but it's always the question, okay, now I measured something and how do I improve? Now I know what kind of technical debt do I have in my system. How do I improve on this? And we will get into this and let's dive into this. Just to do the 2-minute reminder, what we went to, and I think you are all pretty well aware what is clean core for extensibility. Of course, today, as you've seen in the sessions, we will focus on the second of the five guiding principles of clean core. So we will focus today on, again, extensibility. So what I do now and what I tell now, and maybe I should mute my Teams. So give me 1 second. Otherwise, some more messages will pop up. So now it's done. What we will dive in now is mainly true for extensibility. Not that we mix something up, but still we mentioned it last time. It's making sense if we dive deep into extensibility. For example, we measure technical debt, we measure the amount of business modifications, stuff like that. But then we need to also consider, what's the implication on the processes? Maybe this is an area where we want to be differentiating. Maybe it's not. And today we will focus also on the dark blue interference here. Operations, how to put this into life, how do we get this running, and how do we get this to a reality. Already last time we discussed this picture, we will come back to this, but just as a reminder, we have two main notions in this little picture here on the right hand side. One is the stay clean. What you need to do for every function request, for every new requirement that comes in, you need to think about, is it making sense from a process point of view? Is it really worth going an extra mile? And we will talk about your best path to find the best architecture and implementation. And then also how to ensure in the last stage, in the deployment stage, which is closely integrated into your operations model, that you only transport into your productive system where you are sure that this is exactly how you wanted it to be. This is something, these 4 steps, that I would say these are the 4 mandatory steps for stay clean. Every new requirement, if you do a greenfield project, this is super important. But even if you are in a lift and shift scenario or you're already productive in cloud ERP, it's also super important for everything that's new. Second, Notion is on the top, and that's the basis that we talk about. How do we keep the system, how do we look at that? How we do the monitoring? Because if we don't measure anything, it's nice if we have a governance process in place, but this should be somehow connected with what you measure in the system. And that basically brings me to the last picture I want to quote from my last time, because last time we basically ended with how do we achieve then this clean core topic for extensibility. And I brought up this picture, which will guide us through today's session, because we will deep dive a little bit. And it's again referring to these 2 notions of stay clean for everything new. What's the goal? We don't want to increase the technical debt baseline, because everything that we develop new should be without any additional new technical debt. What do we mean by this? Any unnecessary technical debt, because there's always something where you feel like, hey, this is something I need to do. There is no API, no level A stuff available. And secondly, if we have established something like a measurement, a technical debt baseline, you will see in a second what I mean by this. I will come back to the first part of the picture in a second, that we then say, hey, get clean means over time you reduce your technical debt in the system. So technical debt could be seen as everything that's not ideal, not perfectly clean. And how do you reduce that? Not in a big bang. It will take years if you have hundreds of thousands of custom code objects to improve there. Maybe not every gap will close, but you have the possibility to, over time, control there. One is based on single use cases, that you say, hey, I have a use case and I want to change something here from a functional point of view, then maybe I can move my old Dynpro-based ALV application into something more modern, easier to consume for my users, because I anyway have to change. So I can get rid of some technical debt. And then there typically is a leading business case where we say like, hey, now it's making sense to shift something. And the second part is mentioned here, general goals. What do we mean by this? Sometimes it's nice if you have something to measure that you say, hey, now we set goals on this. What do we mean by these goals? Well, something like reduce in the next year your technical debt score by 10%. Get rid of 10% of your ATC messages, something like that. That's making sense. So these are the steps that we see, but how do we get there? It's like, okay, now I understand I need to reduce the numbers, but that's why I mentioned I want to go back. First thing for this is, how do we measure a technical debt baseline? What is technical debt and how do we get there? And this will be the first part of the session today, that we say, okay, we can measure clean core basically in 2 different ways. And we already mentioned it in our sessions, in the general session, as well as in the process and our last extensibility session, that there are 2 flavors of measuring clean core. One is the governance maturity part, basically describing how well are you set up to stay clean. But not only to stay clean, it could also be like, do you have, for example, your KPIs set up? Do you measure something? Do you set up goals? Basically, it's like, if I would be the doctor, it would be like, hey, are you exercising? How well are you? What is your nutrition plan? So basically, I want to understand what's the process around the system. And keeping the picture now up, if we talk about, and I admit I stole that from my colleague Michael, I like that picture that we say, hey, if clean core is something like the general health or general situation of a human body, then of course the processes are important, and what we eat, how often we eat, when do we sleep, all of this kind of rules, tools, do you exercise? This is super important. But sometimes we also need to measure something in the system, because to kind of for the last time referred to that picture, if you don't take your values, if you don't see like, okay, is my weight going up or down? Is, for example, values from the blood, are they going up or down, or let's say in general into the right direction? What's a good direction? Do we need to have the best values in O2 saturation in your blood every time? Or what's an acceptable value? That's where we need to measure something, because there's this old saying, you cannot improve something if you don't measure it. Maybe then it's even not there at all. And that's something where I want to start with. What are things that we can measure? Now moving away from this picture of the human body and how everything works together to clean core, because this is what we want to dive into. So where and how can I measure my system's status with regards to clean core? Right-hand side. And the answer that you see here in the picture is rather simple, the Rise with SAP methodology dashboard. So let's dive a bit into this. And you can see here, I took the picture. I admit I didn't adjust it, but there is a good place for this. So we have the Rise with SAP methodology dashboard in Cloud ALM. If you're a Rise customer, you can open it up and you see in your account tenant, you have this kind of overview. Let me see. I tried a demo this morning. It was not working. So let me open up the Cloud ALM demo tenants. So what I do here now is I access a publicly available demo tenant for Cloud ALM. So you can do the same. No big magic. You can open that up. And if I now log myself in, now it's working. This morning I got a decline. Maybe something was updated or stuff like that. I can log in. And what you can see here is I directly navigated with my link into the systems view. But what we can do as well is you go into your account, start page. If you have the right authorization, you go into the Rise with SAP methodology or Rise with SAP tab here or ribbon. You go into the systems view because we want to assess one system. And then we go into one of our systems. Example data is here. You can see we want to talk about extensibility today. And you can see in this system, we have several numbers in. If we now dive into another system, so let me go back. I think this one is the example. We see some more numbers, and this is because what you can do now, and this is available for 1 week now. So in our last session, October 14th, many things have changed in between. In this case, this was not there yet. It was still in development. Now we can share it. So your Rise dashboard will now show the level share. Last time we mentioned level A, level B, level C, level D, what it exactly is. And it will show you this. How to do that? By running ATC. We will show that in a second, what kind of ABAP test cockpit result you need. And then you can go here and say, hey, I want to upload this. In the public tenant, not everyone has the authorization to do so, because otherwise it would be crashing. But you can see here, these are my imports that were done. Of course, this is some kind of fake data because it's always done, you see that it's generated, but you can upload that, for example, on a monthly base. And then you can see how is my system developing. And it's kind of natural. You see, green things are getting more and more. The red numbers are decreasing. So the level D from 634 to 596. So if I would be a manager now, I would say, hey, this system, it's getting better. We're in a good shape. We're on a good path. So what we have, first answers, where and how do we measure clean core? Rise with SAP methodology dashboard. Some improvements done last week, and there will be some more improvements because right now, let me be very transparent. I can, if I go back to my browser, you can see it. I cannot click in here and deep dive onto this. This is something planned for the near future, latest in Q1. But this is then available that you can click in, okay, what are my 596 level D objects that I can get this actionable? At the same time, you do the ATC import, and we will see that in a second when we deep dive on ATC. Yes, you can get this directly out of the system and out of the data itself. It's just not yet there that we have the dashboard. Still, I like that we already pushed this to production without the deep dive because it's a starting point. And it's something, especially in the communication within a project to, for example, project leads or program leads, it's good to show that and that we have this kind of measurability in there. But what are we measuring there? We are measuring our KPIs. These KPIs are not something we just thought of, hey, this is something we can maybe invent in our cloud ALM. So let me dive back in here. If we move into our Clean Core, I'm sorry, wrong link, to our Clean Core extensibility white paper, which was also updated to the newest version in the last week. So it's a good time that we talk now. You can see already here how to achieve clean core, governance maturity, and then we have the measurability with extensibility KPIs. The KPIs that are mentioned in here are exactly the ones that are now coming into the Rise with SAP methodology dashboard, as mentioned in the text. The good thing is, if you want to dive deeper into this, yes, we could now together read through this little piece of paper here, the white paper. I won't do that, but we also have a nice slide deck explaining all of the KPIs. I will put the link later in the chat, and then you can find it. It's a publicly available slide deck that describes what KPIs do we have, not only for extensibility, of course. It's also for all of the other dimensions, how to measure it. So now let's dive in. What do we want to measure, or why do we think about this topic of measuring clean core in this way? Well, what are things that we want to measure is basically whatever is in the system that you created as an extension that's not perfectly clean. And good ways or KPIs to measure this, and we thought through that with several experts, discussions, customer experience, and we brought up some, let's say, more obvious ones, the easy ones, and then some more complicated ones. But for me, I want to deep dive into one of these a bit deeper. But let's start with the maybe obvious and easy ones. Everyone has heard before, modifications are bad. And of course, it's a number that you should track. So how do we measure business modifications, and what is then the idea behind that? A modification basically is something where you changed SAP standard code, very uncloudy, to be very open and honest. And in any public cloud or SaaS solution, this is typically not possible. But at the same time, we all know how useful it is and how helpful it can be if there is no API, no extension point. But what is a business modification? Basically, we have a documentation in here that says then exactly what is in here. And you can, I think, see it also in the RISE dashboard. So let me open that up back again. In the RISE dashboard. Here it is. You can see the number of business modifications. In this case, it's 54. It's not going up or down. Nice. Why is it making sense? Because these 54 business modifications, and let me show you, there's an explanation of what a business modification is. So we have all of the KPIs in here. It's all of the modifications that are in the system, stored technically in the S-Modilog table, minus some rules that we have in here. For example, inactive modifications are not counted. Modifications that are coming automatically with the implementation of a node are not counted. So there are lots of things already put out of scope, but still we need to be aware, in this case, the 54, maybe for you it's 120. This is something these are more candidates of business modifications. Some of them might be very technical. Implementing a node manually is still in there. We're working on this. But why is it making sense to measure it? Because generally they pose a risk, because in the next upgrade, the standard part of SAP, that the standard piece of code that you modified, could change. And then you need to discuss again, okay, do we still need this? Is it still needed, or is it fixed by standard? So there's effort behind that. So check business modifications, totally making sense. Another number that is in there and that's making sense is the unused code share. And how is this done? Basically, the central tool on that is the ABAP call monitor, SCMon. And there is a transaction to do this kind of aggregation. This transaction is called SUSG or SUSGE, whatever you want to call it. And basically what's happened there is every code that can be executed is measured. So not all of your custom code objects, no tables are measured there or stuff like that, but executable objects are counted. And then you can say, and the numbers are typically quite high, that we see, hey, we have maybe for a year usage data, and then you identify in this year only 40 to 60% of your custom code, of your custom objects are called or are used at all. And of course, the best code, the best extension is the one that you don't need anymore, that you can get rid of. So this could be a good starting point. It could be very hands-on and pragmatic to say, like, hey, this is something where we can start. Let's start here, remove unused code, because you don't need to dive into cleaning up or stuff like that if you can simply delete it. Of course, it's not always that simple, but how is it done? And you can see we always have these two slides on the KPIs. This is the more technical view, how it's calculated, what are the tools, ABAP Core Monitor and SUSG. And you can see also what kind of nodes are in there. And to give you this kind of transparency, because I admit I like it, maybe you see that I like this kind of openness for the execution of customer objects. You can see here already, let me go in here, unused customer object I wanted to go for. There is some reference, but in general, we have an overview for the system view that says here clean core tool status. And for ABAP Call Monitor, you can simply click on it. It's important that you click because then it changes. You see aggregated usage data, ABAP Call Monitor, and then you can see, is it running? Yes. If not, this is the node. And typically this is then for your basis expert enough to get this running and going. So everything is in there. Yes, we also have it in the slides. The notes are in there, but it's like you also have it publicly available in our documentation. I admit I like that quite a lot, that we open up and say, like, hey, this is how you can measure it, because this is basically the prerequisite to start then the discussion. These were two of the simple KPIs. I would say it's important to have them, but at the same time, I would say these are not key. We already saw the clean core share, so the percentage of code objects per clean core level. How is this now done? Basically, and here I added then already the screenshot, basically by saying, hey, the worst reference in an object, in a custom code object wins. What does it mean? And we will come to this in a second, how this is done in ATC exactly, but there is a mapping between the levels and findings in ATC. Let me briefly open up this slide. I will come back to it in a second because we will need it when we dive deeper into ATC. What do we see here is the levels A, B, C, D. You might remember them from our last session. A is the best, D is the worst. And then we say, how do we identify this? A means in our ABAP test cockpit, there is no message, no finding at all. B means a prio 3, so an info message. C means a warning is visible. And D means an error. So let's play that through. We run our ABAP test cockpit for our custom code object for our Z class that we have in our system. We run ATC. We end up with 3 info messages. Then this object is a level B object. We end up with 2 prio 3 messages, info messages, and 1 error. It's still a level D object because the worst one wins. Whenever you have maybe 100 small things in there and 1 error, the error wins. That's what we mean with this level overview is kind of based on this concept of saying the worst reference wins. But it gives you an overview, okay, how many objects do I have that are super clean or that are not clean at all? But it doesn't tell you directly where to start. Of course, if you narrow it down, if you say, like, hey, within SD or finance or whatever you have your objects based on, within Brazil or country-wise, whatever you have, then maybe it's a good starting point to say, like, hey, I need to dive into this because maybe my finance colleagues in this headquarter have a lot of level A and the others have a lot of level D. Then this is the starting point on a high level. I still see the main or the most important KPI in the area of clean core, and that's why it was mentioned in the slide that I shared at the beginning here. It's the technical debt. What is it? The technical debt? We would say the technical debt score. It's like taking all of your findings in ABAP test cockpit and then creating a virtual sum out of that. And of course, that's kind of critical because easily it gets into gamification and numbers, but it's a number that you can compare. I have one class that has maybe, you see it here, 5 errors, 20 warnings, and 10 information messages. This will end up in 160 points. And then I can compare it to another class that maybe has 20 errors then it will have more points because that alone is 200 points. Then you can compare where is the biggest number, where is the biggest technical debt in there. Of course, it should be somehow considered how big is an object, how important is an object, what's the runtime, the usage of that object. So is it often used or not? All of this needs to be considered, but this is for me the central KPI when it comes to extensibility. Every object can be given the score, and you can already see it as a teaser in our RISE dashboard. If I go back into my demo environment here, you can see an average technical debt score of all objects, which is kind of okay, but still, if you then double click later on, if we have the deep dive dashboard beginning of next year, this will be super cool because if you can then identify, okay, which are the objects with the highest technical debt score, then it gets interesting. Now we see the level and the technical debt score KPI both rely on this ATC, ABAP Test Cockpit. That's why I thought we need to dive a bit into this. How is it going? And just for the sake of completeness, we will share the slides so you will have the details in here, how to measure clean core, how to do that in detail. Very important. And if you want to brag a bit in front of your friends, learn that note because you will refer to it if you talk about clean core often. 3565942, super nice. This is the note where this new ATC check is coming from that I'm referring to. Because ATC itself is a huge framework to check quality of ABAP code in general. But how does it work now with ATC and clean core? As mentioned, we have this new concept here that we have the clean core levels in. Why do we have this, or what is happening there is that we say we have this ATC check, and based on different pieces of information, this ATC check will end up with the priority 3, 2, or 1 findings. How does it look like? And otherwise I will spend, if I do a live demo, I will spend like 10 minutes just for the sake of a demo. That's why I took some screenshots. If I have this little piece of code, randomly taking 4 references to SAP code, this one will not be analyzed because the new check only looks into executable code that's referenced, so no data elements, nothing like that. And then it's considering this ATC check released objects. Every released object will not lead to any issue at all, so no finding in case of a released object. And at the same time, it's also taken into account the object classifications. We already touched it last time. So we have our cloudification repository. And in this cloudification repository, we have the different states. So for example, a classic API. And if you call now a function module, like this one here, CL GUI ALV grid, a classic one to create an ALV, ABAP list view, then you can see, this class here is a classic API, or something called job open. You can see the job open. It's one of the function modules you need if you do batch jobs within your system with the classic way, not with the cloud job infrastructure or whatever. Then this is the way to go. And you can see it's nominated as classic API. So it's not perfectly released, but still stable from an SAP perspective, or mostly stable. We recommend to use it. What do you see now is this call function job open leads to an info message, whereas everything else that's not on this list, for example, this EWM is for posting a transportation order, leads to it's called an internal object or internal API. I would more call it an internal object one in line 9. It's this one. And selecting from SAP tables, VBAK, it's not released. If you read, it's a warning, so it's level C. If you write into that, so if this would be something like an update statement, or even worse, a delete statement, and this would be an error, a prior one. Whenever we have now an object that is in this list here marked as no API, and I need to take out the filter, and then you can see less than 500 objects. The RFC read table is my favorite example I always use. Then you can see this is something you must not use. If you use this in your code, it's an error. Why? Because all of the unknown objects, like the EWM one that's not classified somewhere as classic API. It's like not good. But the ones that are errors, these are the ones where you need to take some priority on. This is where you need to start. And this check that checks automatically the released and the object classification lists is coming with this node. That's why this is super important. What's happening then is, and coming back now to what we've seen before on the calculation, ATC runs up with, in this case, my object has 2 warnings and 1 info message. So we come back, my technical depth score of this object would be 2 warnings, 2 times 5, 10, plus 1 info message, 11. And now I can compare it with other objects, and that's interesting because you get then a huge list of objects in your system, and you can say like, hey, which one is the object with the highest technical depth score? Maybe it's a surprise. Maybe it's something where you say, hey, this is something where it's okay. This is our most critical, most complex development. We anyway want to decommission it in the future. What we will see is in the future that these data collectors and the ATC upload of the RISE with SAP methodology dashboard will offer this also as a deep dive. Right now, we only have the high level view. And you can see here right now, you can do it with the ATC check. You can export ATC and you can do some stuff in there. Because I need to disclaim that here officially, there is mentioned an open source project, Project Kernseife, which is basically standing for SOAP, basic SOAP. It's just a German game with a name, we can say. So it's like Kern means core if you translate it word by word. Seife means soap. So it's like a little, playing with the name of cleaning the core. It's something that we open sourced. It's publicly available for everyone. And I don't want to go into the details because otherwise, again, I spend 10 minutes on this, 10 minutes on that, and we don't come to the governance part. But what you can do there is that you can, with Project Kernseife, go for a custom classification. If, for example, you do an EWM project, you need to use this function module, and you don't want to have this SCWMTO post every time popping up like something bad, you can do that. So what you do there is with Kernseife, you have your own or custom ATC check that you can implement in your system that works with a custom classification, taking into consideration our official release data. You can see here for SCWMTO post, for example, you can do then your own rating. BF1, although it's not officially released, which means BF1, it's only an information message. And the score is directly the technical depth score, you can say, is 1. Like the one for the job open, which is a classic API in standard. So you can overrule that, but to kind of finalize this, there is some more to read about that. You need to install it. It's more effort. It's not the standard classification. But at the same time, we see that in bigger projects, or let's say projects with people involved that want to take ownership on this, because this is super important. Someone needs to own this kind of classification ownership. Then this can really be a game changer because you can on your own decide this will never be an error again, although in the SAP classification it is. We can overrule that, which can simplify your governance. We added some blocks to this, and there's a Git repository. So if you want to dive deeper into this, feel free. It's community-based, so we can invite you to work with it. You can simply download it. It's out there for free. Technically, you can see here, we already in our BTP app have this kind of vision out there. What are the objects with the highest technical depth score? Also how to clean up things, maybe with successors or stuff like that. And let me state that clearly. This is in a close collaboration with our Calm team as well to say, like, hey, what from projects can we learn that we can feed into the standard? So this is a bit like a front runner. So now we talked about how do we measure clean core on the one hand side. In this picture, sorry, wrong picture. In this picture, now we have the technical depth baseline. Why is it there? Because it's for me the most important one. You can sum up all of your technical depth of all of your custom code objects. Ideally, you don't add that much into there. And ideally, you reduce it over time. For example, thinking now of all the KPIs, deleting unused code reduces also your technical depth. All the technical depth in the object is gone as well. So I think the combination of the different KPIs is totally making sense. Now we talked about this stay clean and get clean from a very, let's say, technical point of view. And I still owe you the second part. So now we dive into the second part of the session. We now know how to measure something in the system, taking a blood sample, measuring whatever values in there, blood sugar, whatever. Yes, check, Rise with SAP methodology dashboard. If you want to, you can do a star here or ABAP test cockpit, custom dashboards. I've seen Cloud Analytics, SAP Analytics Cloud based on ATC data directly. But basically, this is how you do that. Now we need to identify, okay, and how do we measure the governance, the processes around the tools, the governance structures? And for this, what we have in general is the Rise with SAP methodology. And there we have Q gates that are currently in the process of being enhanced with something that we call the Clean Core Governance and Maturity Assessment. And this is especially for staying clean, for not, let's say, messing up any new requirement in a way that is feel like, we could have avoided that easily. And to measure also for this get clean, of course, do I measure something? So how do I assess now the big picture of governance? The source of this is, again, a public PowerPoint. So everything that I quote on from now or that I take is available in here. You can see the link and the QR code. You can download it. It's publicly available. And basically, this Clean Core measurement framework for governance and maturity, I would say, is like a well thought through and scalable questionnaire. And it might be a bit overwhelming if you do everything at once, because again, we have it for all of the different guiding principles, extensibility, processes, integration. So I would recommend not do everything at once. But now we're talking extensibility. What are the topics that we need to cover? And extensibility plays a bit a special role here because we still have or we split up the topics into two big buckets. One is the governance itself, and the second is how well is this reflected in the system setup. I want to focus today on the governance itself because the system setup, like have you set up automated code checks with ATC, exemption process, the 3-tier model, or now we would say maybe ABAP cloud setup. Have we set up the RISE data, the collection for the RISE dashboard and as a BTP account setup? That's also important. It kind of reflects the maturity of how well you're set up. But I want to focus on the left-hand side because from my perspective, that's even more important. So what we want to do then is, and this is what in my main job being an enterprise architect and being there the lead architect, or you could say the back office for the enterprise architects, what we want to do is that we want to assess with a company, with our customers, the system, and we want to come up with something like this. That could be a result of a maturity assessment. We say, hey, for example, on the extension architecture guidelines or your development guidelines, there we have some gaps between where we are currently on a scale of 0 to 5 and where we want to be. In this case, for example, we see, hey, there's something around the scoping for the custom code adoption. This is conversion only. That's something, hey, there is no need to do something. But there are some areas where we have bigger gaps. And it's not even about the spider or web chart. It's about taking actions out of that. How do we improve our extension architecture guidelines, our governance process, our developer skills? How do we do that? By actions. And this is our idea that we come out with actions out of this kind of questions. And this is how we set up these questions and topics that you then have sometimes very easily. Sometimes it's a bit of a discussion. What would be a good next step? But that we come up with, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 10 initiatives on how to improve your governance and maturity within the next 12 months. It could be, of course, that you do this then on a benefit versus ease of implementation metrics, like done here. Which one is the easiest task with the highest benefit? Activate the Calm-based Clean Core dashboard for the S4 environment. That's a simple task and you get nice insights. Okay, that's something that I should do now. This is, of course, something of a discussion, but this is always the target. How can we improve something? And for me, it's important to understand here, the target score is not always 5. maybe there are things where you feel like, hey, 5 is okay, but not for me. I'm more the guy, I need a 3 or 4 here, and I'm happy with it. So that you can identify which one are the most urgent ones. And now, how did we come up with the measurement? By asking questions per what we call practice. Each of these topics is what we call a practice. We have a description on that, but let me deep dive now into the list of it, and then we dive into 1, 2, or 3 of these practices. You can see here, it's a simple sheet, and in the long run, it's also planned that we have all of this in our cloud ALM as kind of the central tool for managing our systems and our landscape and our governance. That you can then say, hey, today I want to look into extensibility, and we talk about the governance process in general. That's the biggest question of all. How well is your governance process set up? The extension architecture guidelines. How do you derive from a requirement the right target architecture for your extension? The development guidelines, when it comes then into realization, how well are your development guidelines aligned with ABAP Cloud, with the clean core principles that we have? What about the developers themselves? Are they skilled, enabled? Do they have some free time to enable themselves, for example, on ABAP Cloud? Or are they stuck in projects? Do you enforce, for example, certification of external consultants? That you say every lead developer in my projects needs to be ABAP Cloud certified. That would be an idea. That's something actionable where I can say, hey, this is how I can directly improve my situation. Do I measure at all? Do I have KPIs set up? And do I have something like a housekeeping practice, like regular ATC runs, usage data, stuff like that? And for all of these practices, I now mentioned the high-level overview. That's nice because I admit I was also part of the team creating these this overview and the topic, and that's my day job, just extensibility, back and forth and everything. But how can we scale this now? And there we thought, hey, for each of the topics, we need something like an overview. What's the idea behind? So the governance process for extensions. This practice ensures a robust governance process for deviations by documenting and managing extension requests throughout their lifecycle. And then you can see validating business necessity, enforcing architecture and approval standards, accommodating changes through that process, and recording these decisions in technical depth, all under expert review. So this is the idea behind. Then we have some nasty questions. If you say like, hey, I'm a 5 out of 5 in there, I would then say, nice. So for you, a continuous governance process, including documentation, is defined, and it's coming from the request over the architecture implementation until deployment. And there is a governance process, and then you have maybe different approval levels in that. And how do you track changes? That's for me the most difficult question, because you plan to do something completely clean, and then you identify my API I want to use is not usable because I need to do something that's not available in the standard API. It's simply not doable. What to do then? In the midst of implementation, go through the whole chain back to the start and do the whole approval on a different level now, because the target architecture now changes into something with higher technical depth? Or do you have maybe then the rule that a lead developer needs to accept this or to approve this? How do you document this? So it's not that there is a straightforward, simple solution for everything, but I guess you get the feeling. What's the idea behind that? To say, like, do we have, for example, documentation of these decisions on technical architecture? Are they written down somewhere? So if I look into an extension, my new SD portal internally that I created on my own, I can see at one place the functional request, the business case maybe behind that, the planned architecture, the implemented architecture, and some decisions on the architecture themselves. So maybe why did we go for a side-by-side extension? These were the reasons. This is also transparently visible. This would be the perfect happy place. If everything like this is in place, I would say nice, 5 out of 5. But based on these detailed questions, maybe you and your company feel like, okay, this and that are important points that I directly want to go into. Actions, write them down, and then we have later on the list of actions, and we put them in this nice little metric with the value and the effort, and then we say, hey, this is a good task. And we have this for all of the different practices. And what we also have is a little description. It's in the slide deck that I showed, the where the QR code is linking to and where the link is in the documentation. Also like, okay, what is this 0 to 5? I would say there is some, it's not like measuring technical debt, or like database size, a gigabyte is always a gigabyte. 2 error messages in ATC are always 2 error messages. Here, of course, there is some room for discussions and for, let's say, political handling that you can say, yeah, we are somewhere between 2 and 3 and stuff like that. But still, it's like you get a feeling, are we really doing everything or not? We have this for all the different practices. And we also have, you can see here, extension architecture guidelines. Do you have then, for example, something like the application extension methodology or something comparable in place? So a structured guidance to guide architects into the best architecture. Do you have then the extension domain chosen based on your use case? Is this done based on a general decision asset, or is it done based on an expert only? So I would always go with my ABAP on stack. I'm wearing my ABAP hoodie. Yeah, you can see it. Nice. But if you ask my colleague, maybe he would be like, yeah, go for a cloud native implementation with Node.js. That's super easy. Ideally, you have a general decision asset that's aligned with everyone in the company, and even ideally with your strategic outlook on where you want to develop stuff in the future. So you see, there are lots of questions on the details. For example, also on KPIs, what KPIs are you measuring? Do you look into this? Have you set these KPIs already up? Are they available or not? Do you measure them regularly, or is it just a random one-time thing in a project? So you see there are these different topics available, and we try to cover everything. But coming back to the initial point, it's not the goal to be the 5 out of 5 everywhere if it's not making sense for you. So it's about where is the biggest pain for me? And still, it's something somewhat measurable, because in your communication, for example, you do a big rollout program, then maybe you say, hey, currently we are here. Until we do the next rollout to a major country, we want to improve this to have this then preparation to that rollout project a bit better in there. So we set ourselves a goal to say, now we want to be with the governance process in total, not on a 2 as right now, maybe we want to be more on a 3, something like that. It's not measurable like 1 and 0 or kilogram or gigabyte, but still it's somewhat measurable. And I think it's always, when we talk about governance, how well are you set up? How often do you exercise? Coming back to the medical picture of the human body, it's like, yeah, I'm doing this and that. It's like, of course, we can measure everything in detail, but in the end, it's also about the numbers will speak for themselves. If your governance process, and that's why I like this kind of picture where we have the duality of these two things, if your governance process is set up the right way, your KPIs will kind of automatically move into the right direction. Or if not, you will at least identify where this deviation is coming from. So that is now how do we set this up? And at the same time, because the goal for today is, or was, to talk about how do we now get to this clean core, I would say by measuring what's in the system and by keeping track of the technical debt. And at the same time, by looking at the governance maturity, because from that you can then derive good tasks to stay clean. And now coming back to this picture of the two notions, also for get clean, of course, measuring technical debt helps you enormously. Because stay clean, you can see here, the goal is to avoid, you could say, unnecessary new technical debt. There might be some technical debt that you still need. But if we look now into this get clean, I think that's something that we centrally want to transport. It's not about doing everything at once. It's not like, hey, in 12 months, everything is cleaned up. But to identify numbers and to measure something, to identify then also use cases based on the functional requirements in there, based on is there any change needed, but also based on their technical debt. Where is my highest technical debt is the best starting point that we see. It's nothing that will happen overnight. So this get clean is nothing that will overnight reduce your technical debt score of a system by 50%. But if you have maybe a project to reduce unused code, maybe you have a project to, or some goals like, hey, I want to reduce my technical debt score per module, per project, per area by 10% in the next year. That's typically something where you also can get developers, because often developers are more numbers based. And if you say like, hey, reduce your ATC findings by that, you have something tangible that they can work against, that they can plan against. But this also means that you give them, if you're more in a program management or lead perspective, that you need to plan this in. Because if you don't give some room for your developers to develop the skills, to adjust to these targets, then you might end up in the future and say like, hey, why did we end up here and not there? Because the developers don't do technical debt because they want to do it or stuff like that. They need to do all of this kind of enablement stuff. They need to have something to be measured against. That's ideally even fair. So that's the whole idea. As far or so far, I've not seen any magical thing to say like, hey, this is how you reduce your technical debt by, I don't know, 80%. And I admit I would doubt that, because this technical debt that you end up here, if you have a system that was developed in for maybe 20 years, maybe 10 years, this will not move away overnight. So technically, we end up with the very same picture. And you can see the tasks we mentioned the last time, like set up goals on legacy code, introducing the Boy Scout principle, so leave the camp or the code cleaner as you found it, and to upskill your developers and adjust your governance, are basically exactly the same like last time. I still hope that from this session, you took some more details onto this. We now go back. What is important? Measure KPIs and leverage ATC as of today. You can use the RISE dashboard. You can, if you're feeling like, hey, I want to take more ownership on this, you can use our open source project and dive into the governance maturity assessment, because these two are the assets, the KPIs and the governance maturity assessment, that can drive you closer to Clean Core. With this, I'd like to close the active part of this session and at the same time dive into the Q&A, and let me dive in if I can identify if there are some more questions coming in. I think some were already answered.
I answered a few, but one I leave open for you, because I think it's one that you like to answer a little bit more elaborate.
The one with these points for scoring fixed, recommended, or
Correct,
can a customer?
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me put it this way. There are, as always, two answers to this. There is the standard answer. So here, this is also what we wrote. It's the same text box technically in the white paper. There, this is fixed, the 1, 5, and 10. And we did this with some customers, and we just ended up with this. So it's basically, you could say random. It's like, why? Because you want to have the different scales for error is weighted a lot more than an information message. But still, it's like if you have a lot of info messages, there should be something in. Here, this is kind of fixed. It could be a good request to the RISE dashboard people if over time we could offer this kind of as a flexible thing. But right now, if you want to measure this flexibly right now, I can refer to our open source solution, because what you can see there, and I briefly mentioned it on this slide, if you do your own custom classification, you can see here, BF1 means business function recommended. It gives you 1 point, and this is editable. So in that open source, if you want to take the full ownership, the full, also efforts to do the maintenance behind that, you can then overrule this and say, for example, in this, the use case that we do with that EWM project where we use this quite a lot, for example, we say, hey, this one is basically just an info message and just 1 point, compared to the table usage, we want to go for 10 points because we don't want to have direct table access. We just want to have it. So brief answer to the question, in the standard dashboard, they are fixed. If you want to go for a custom one, think of this kind of Kernseife approach. Okay, and you already mentioned like it's answered. Nice. with this, I see no raised hands so far and no questions. So maybe we give everyone a minute.
While we're giving the people a minute, let me advise you of the next session. So we will hear us again next week, Tuesday again, where we talk about achieving a clean core business process, actionable steps and context to accelerate maturity. Again, next week, Tuesday, same date, same time. Okay. I see one attendant has raised his hands. Let me allow that person to talk. So the person that raised his hands, he can now talk.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate for this session. Is there anywhere, like we just spoke about this, the dashboard to view all the clean code, which we also call the cloudification repository viewer. Is there an offline viewer or some kind of a repository or some kind of API that we can use for this? Let's say if I have to do this programmatically.
Not an offline one, but what you can do is, and let me open up that in the browser. So that cloudification repository viewer that I'm using here, or that's publicly available, to be very clear, this is all based on data that is available in a central Git repository. So let me show you. It's a github.com repository in the SAP namespace. And the source of that is in here. And technically, it's a number of JSON files. You can see it here. And with this one, of course, you can work against that. The nice thing is, why I like these files is independent on what release you have, you can also see the released objects. So you can, if you're now on 2022, you can already check, hey, will this object be released in 2025? Yes or no? If it's not yet released. So yes, this is something where you can, of course, programmatically work with. Basically, this is what this little app is doing. It's just a display on a JSON file.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even see that if you go to the latest release or whatever, you can see here, this is based on the files. So if I look into this, we have the 2022 SP0. This is exactly what files we do have here. This one, this one, this one, this one. So this is where it is based on.
Oh,
and
great.
Of course, you can take that JSON and do then some Python or JavaScript or ABAP logic on top of that.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
More than welcome.
Right.
I think with this, we hit the top of the hour.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we're almost. Again, we'll hear us next week on Tuesday again, same date, same time. We'd be happy to welcome you there as well. And with that, thank you, Lukas. Thank you, Michael, for the session today, and wish you all a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.